Fall Blau, or Case Blue, was the German Army's plan for the 1942 strategic summer offensive in southern Russia between June and November of 1942. The main objective was to capture the oil fields of Baku, Grozny and Maikop for two purposes: to enable the Germans to resupply their low fuel stock, and also to deny their use to the Soviet Union, thereby bringing about the complete collapse of the Soviet war machine. Fall Blau was developed by General Franz Halder, the Chief of Staff of the German Army High Command during early 1942. Halder's plan was to be far more limited in scope and territorial ambitions compared with the previous year. The initial invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941 involved 3 army groups. By contrast, Fall Blau focused on just one, Army Group South. Not only was Germany's summer offensive limited to one army group, its objectives were further subdivided into 4 operational phases to be accomplished one at a time, beginning in the north, working its way south. These limitations were very prudent and were designed to ensure a maximum amount of resources would be available for each operational phase. The operations phase-oriented approach was designed to prevent operations from outstripping fuel reserves, which was sure to happen with 2 phases running simultaneously. In late July of 1942, Hitler and Halder actually saw the Soviet 62nd Army stand in the Don River Bend as an opportunity to take out an entire Soviet army at a stroke. Something that had become nearly impossible to achieve so far in the campaign due to the Soviets keeping a certain amount of distance between themselves and the German mechanized forces. However, in pretty much all previous major encirclements of large Soviet formations, it was the Panzerwaffe that delivered the massive victories in the battlefield. The German Sixth Army was eventually playing with 1 Panzer Corps and a half. Nonetheless, by the night of July the 23rd, General Paulus felt reasonably confident he could pull off a smaller scale envelopment of much of the 62nd Army. The plan was to use his 2 Panzer Corps to rip through the enemy's flanks and attempt an envelopment with both armored spearheads meeting up near the river terminus of Kalach. The battlefield was the steppe country west and north of Kalach. The terrain of the battlefield was mostly open, with occasional tree lines that obscure lines of sight and fire. The relatively open nature of the terrain favored long-range direct fire weapons such as the long 75mm cannon that were mounted on German Panzer IV tanks. In the event, the major German forces enjoyed air superiority over the Kalach battlefield with the commitment of the entire German 8th Air Corps. The biggest problem was the Sixth Army's fuel shortfalls. But despite all the problems, Paulus launched the assault on the 62nd Army in the early morning hours of July the 24th with strong air support from the Luftwaffe. Paulus was hopeful that a source of fuel could be procured and flown to the mechanized corps on the ground, something the Luftwaffe had become expert at doing by this point in the war. On the 24th of July, 6th Army was deployed in a crescent-shaped formation from Kletskaya in the north to Nizhny Krinskaya in the south. Paulus deployed his 2 Panzer Corps on the flanks, with the 14th Panzer Corps on the left and the 24th Panzer Corps on the right flank. The 8th, 11th and 51st Army Corps held the middle. Between July 24 and 25, the 14th Panzer Corps exploded out of its staging positions, taking Kletskaya and surrounding 3 Soviet rifle divisions, reaching the Don River and captured the town of Golubinskaya before running out of fuel 20 miles short of linking up with the 24th Panzer Corps further south. During the advance, the Panzeraufklärungs Battalion, or the Tank Recon Battalion, managed to get within 3 miles of Kalach, bringing the city's massive bridge under fire with 3 large-caliber artillery pieces it had in tow before being forced back. Meanwhile, hundreds of Soviet tanks began pouring across the Don to hit the German pincers and save the Soviet 62nd Army from encirclement. Between July the 26th and 28th, the hunters became the hunted as the Soviets hit the 14th Panzer Corps with everything they got. While inflicting heavy casualties on the 14th Panzer Corps, the Soviets lost a lot of tanks as they sent them in with no infantry support. Until the 7th of August, against all odds, the armored assault against the 6th Army was sustained. While suffering heavy casualties, the 6th Army managed to destroy between 300 and 350 Soviet tanks and armored vehicles during a week of intense battle. By early August, the crisis was over, however. Both Panzer Corps gas tanks were dry. Meanwhile, the 8th and 11th Army Corps took some 16,000 POWs. At dawn of the 7th of August, the 14th and 24th Panzer Corps shredded the Soviet front line near Kalach from the north and the south, all the while receiving immense support from the Luftwaffe. From the northeast and southwest, tight against the Don River, the 14th and 24th Panzer Corps struck into the Kalach bridgehead. Their spearheads made contact southwest of Kalach by late afternoon, trapping the main body of the Soviet army. 8 rifle divisions were encircled. The Germans then began systematically destroying the surrounded Soviet forces. The pocket was wiped out in 4 days by the 11th of August. Nearly 50,000 prisoners were taken, and the Germans claimed the destruction of 1,000 Soviet tanks and 750 guns, although the claims of destroyed Soviet tanks were considered a little exaggerated. Air support in the battle was crucial. The Stuka dive bombers mercilessly hammered the trapped Soviet troops and vehicles, while medium bombers bombed the Soviet railway network and airfields with impunity. The technically and numerically inferior Soviet 8th Air Army achieved nothing, thanks to losing its 447 replacement aircraft from late July to mid-August as fast as it received them. the Soviet 62nd Army was destroyed. However, the army would live on as the few thousand soldiers that managed to survive Kalach formed the rump of a new 62nd Army with its rank filed with green recruits. Hitler and the Army High Command concluded that the Red Army was on the verge of collapse. This would have far-reaching consequences for the remainder of the war. Based on this lowered appraisal of the Red Army capabilities and downgraded threat assessment, a series of ill-advised changes were made to Fall Blau's operational game plan. In reality, Hitler and Halder misread the situation on the ground during the weeks prior. Wrong conclusions were made based on observations made of an enemy suddenly unwilling to stand and fight. In reality, the Red Army got smart and learned to make strategic withdrawals, keeping clear of German mechanized pincers ready to envelop massive Soviet formations on the ground, like it had done in 1941 and earlier during the Battle of Kharkov in May of 1942. In the upcoming weeks, German Army Group A and B would be pursuing campaign objectives against ever-increasing resistance along an axis of attack that would only grow wider as time progressed, each fighting for scarce resources that had to travel across a patchwork of Soviet railways and a horrible road network with little or no infrastructure. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you and see you in the next video.